I never thought coming home from 6 months at sea would turn into the biggest real estate battle of my life. The pavilion standing tall and proud on my property line was definitely not there when I left, and I sure as hell didn't authorize anyone to build anything on my land. But there it was, a sprawling wooden structure with a metal roof, complete with benches, tables, and even a small bar setup. The worst part, the smug look on Patricia Miller's face as she stood there with her HOA clipboard, acting like she'd done the neighborhood a favor. "Welcome back, Mr. Thomas," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "We've made some wonderful improvements to the community space while you were away." I stared at her, then at the pavilion, trying to process what I was seeing. "This is my property, Patricia, not community space." Her smile didn't falter. "Well, according to our records, this strip of land falls within the HOA's jurisdiction for community enhancement projects." That was the moment I knew my peaceful return to civilian life after months at sea was going to be anything but peaceful. "My name is Logan Thomas, and until 6 months ago, I'd been living a relatively quiet life in Oak Ridge Estates, a suburban community in Charleston, South Carolina. I'm a marine engineer who contracts with various shipping companies, which means I spend months at a time on vessels crossing oceans. It pays well and suits my preference for solitude, but it also means leaving my property unattended for long stretches. Before my last assignment, I'd been meticulous about preparations. I'd arranged for lawn care, stopped my mail, set up security cameras, and informed the HOA of my absence. Patricia Miller, our HOA president for the past 3 years, had assured me everything would be well taken care of. I just hadn't realized she meant they'd be taking care of themselves to my land. "I need to see the paperwork authorizing this construction," I said firmly, setting my duffel bag down on the driveway. Patricia waved her hand dismissively. All the appropriate notifications were sent. The board voted unanimously to approve the project. "It's been a wonderful addition. The Johnson family held their daughter's graduation party here last weekend." My jaw clenched. "On my property." "Community property," she corrected, her smile tightening around the edges. "The easement allows for. There is no easement on this section of my property, Patricia. I made sure of that when I purchased this house." For the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker in her eyes. "Well, the documents we have indicate. I'd like to see these documents. Now, please." Patricia's demeanor changed instantly. "I don't have them with me. You'll need to submit a formal request to the board. There's a 2-week processing period for document requests." Of course there was. "Fine. Consider this my formal request. In the meantime, I want all community events on this pavilion halted until we clarify ownership." Patricia's face flushed. "You can't do that. We have 3 events scheduled this week alone." "Watch me," I said, picking up my bag and heading toward my front door. "This is private property, and anyone using it without my permission will be trespassing." I heard her huff behind me. "The board will be hearing about this, Logan. I'm counting on it," I called back without turning around. Once inside, I dropped my bag and headed straight for my home office. The house felt stale after being closed up for so long, but that was the least of my concerns. I pulled out my property deed, survey maps, and all documentation related to my land. After 30 minutes of review, my suspicions were confirmed. There was absolutely no easement that would give the HOA any rights to build on that corner of my property. I pulled up my security camera footage next. I had cameras covering most of the exterior of my house, including the area where the pavilion now stood. Scrolling back through months of footage, I found exactly what I needed. Construction had begun just 2 weeks after I left, with workers clearly visible breaking ground and laying the foundation. Among the visitors to the site was Patricia, pointing and directing as though she owned the place. But what really caught my attention was footage from 3 months ago, showing Patricia and another woman examining what looked like documents while standing where the pavilion would eventually be built. I zoomed in, enhanced the image as much as my software would allow, and there it was, what appeared to be a forged signature on what I assumed was a building permit or authorization form. My blood boiled. This wasn't just an HOA overstepping its bounds, this was fraud. I picked up my phone and called the one person I knew could help me navigate this mess. Olivia, it's Logan. I need your legal expertise. The HOA built a structure on my property while I was away, and I think they forged my signature to do it. Olivia Wellington had been my friend since college and was now one of Charleston's most respected real estate attorneys. Her firm specialized in property disputes, and while she typically worked with much larger cases than neighborhood squabbles, she had a particular dislike for overreaching HOAs. They did what? Her voice rose in disbelief. Please tell me you have documentation. Deed, survey maps, and security footage of the whole construction process, including what looks like Patricia Miller showing off a document with my forged signature. Don't touch anything else and don't make any more statements to the HOA. I'll be over in an hour. True to her word, Olivia arrived 55 minutes later, briefcase in hand and fire in her eyes. She wore her typical courtroom attire, a tailored navy suit and low heels, despite it being Saturday afternoon. "Show me everything," she said as soon as I opened the door. For the next 2 hours, we reviewed all my documentation, the camera footage, and the property records. "This is egregious," Olivia finally said, sitting back in my office chair. Her normally pristine blonde hair was slightly disheveled from running her hands through it repeatedly. "They didn't just accidentally encroach on your property, they deliberately built on land they knew wasn't theirs." "What's my best move here?" I asked. Olivia tapped her pen against her notepad. "Legally, you have several options. We could demand they remove the structure immediately, sue for damages and trespassing, or a slow smile spread across her face. "Or, since they've built a rather nice pavilion on your property, you could simply assert your ownership and do with it as you please." "You mean keep it? It's on your land, built without your permission. Under South Carolina law, that structure now belongs to you. They have no legal recourse to reclaim it without admitting to trespassing and possibly fraud." I considered this. The pavilion was well constructed, probably worth at least $30,000. It had electricity, ceiling fans, and even plumbing for the small bar area. As much as I wanted to stick it to Patricia and the HOA, having it torn down seemed wasteful. What if I kept it and rented it out for events? Take the HOA's community space and turn it into my personal business? Olivia's eyes lit up. That would be perfectly legal, if a bit deliciously petty. "Let me check if there are any zoning restrictions that would prevent using it commercially." After another hour of research, Olivia confirmed that my property was zoned for limited commercial use, which would allow for occasional event rentals. The HOA bylaws prohibited running businesses from homes, but there was a specific exemption for rental of exterior structures for events no more than 12 times per year. They probably included that exception so board members could rent out their pools or patios for parties, Olivia explained. They never anticipated someone would have a full pavilion to rent. "So I can legally rent it out, up to 12 times a year, yes. And at market rates for event spaces in Charleston, you could charge $1,000 to $2,000 per event, depending on the season and amenities provided." I whistled softly. That's not bad for something I didn't even build. Just make sure you get proper insurance coverage before hosting any events, Olivia cautioned. And prepare yourself for the HOA's reaction. This won't go over well. Let them come, I said, feeling more confident now that I knew where I stood legally. I've got months of footage showing them trespassing and committing fraud. If they push back, they'll regret it. Olivia packed up her materials. I'll draw up a formal letter asserting your ownership of the pavilion and demanding all HOA events cease immediately. I'd also recommend filing a police report about the forged signature. Even if you decide not to press charges, having an official record is important. After Olivia left, I walked out to inspect the pavilion more closely. It really was a nice structure: cedar posts, metal roof, stamped concrete floor, built-in benches around the perimeter, and a central area that could accommodate 6 to 8 tables. The small bar had a sink, mini fridge, and electrical outlets. String lights hung from the rafters, giving it a festive atmosphere. I could see why it had become a popular spot for community events. As I was examining the wiring for the ceiling fans, a car pulled up to the curb. A woman in her 40s with a severe bob haircut and oversized sunglasses stepped out, clutching a folder. I recognized her as Barbara Johnson, the HOA vice president and Patricia's right-hand woman. "Mr. Thomas," she called out, marching toward me. "I understand there's been some confusion about the community pavilion." "No confusion on my part," I replied calmly. "This pavilion was built illegally on my property, and I'm now taking possession of it." Barbara's steps faltered. That's not possible. "We have all the proper documentation and approvals." "Forged documentation doesn't count, Barbara." Her face paled. "I don't know what Patricia told you, but the board approved this project unanimously after reviewing the paperwork she provided." That caught my attention. "Are you saying the board didn't verify the documentation independently?" Barbara shifted uncomfortably. "Patricia assured us everything was in order. She had what appeared to be signed consent forms and permit applications." As treasurer, I was primarily concerned with ensuring we had the budget for the project. "And how much did this pavilion cost?" "Approximately $42,000, including materials, labor, and landscaping." I whistled. "That's quite an investment in someone else's property." Barbara's expression hardened. "This is community property, Mr. Thomas. The documents clearly showed forged documents," I interrupted. "I have video evidence of Patricia standing right here with what appears to be my forged signature. Would you like to see it?" The color drained from Barbara's face. That can't be right." "It is. And as a board member who approved an illegal construction project, you could potentially be held personally liable." That got her attention. "Personally liable, but we're protected by the HOA's insurance." "Not in cases of fraud," I said, taking a gamble that I was right. Based on Barbara's expression, I'd hit the mark. "What do you want?" she asked quietly. "The truth. Did you know this was my property? Did you know Patricia didn't have my permission?" Barbara hesitated, then her shoulders sagged. I had concerns. The property line seemed unclear, and Patricia was unusually insistent on pushing the project through quickly. "But she assured us you had verbally approved it before leaving and had signed the documentation." "And no one thought to call or email me to confirm. Patricia said you were unreachable at sea." I pulled out my phone. "Funny, I seem to have email access and a satellite phone for emergencies." Barbara looked genuinely distressed now. "I'm sorry, Mr. Thomas." "The board trusted Patricia's leadership. If what you're saying is true, she misled all of us." "I'll be addressing this with the full board," I said. "In the meantime, all HOA events scheduled for this pavilion are canceled. This is now my private property." "There's a baby shower scheduled for tomorrow," Barbara protested. "The Miller family has invited over 30 people." "The Miller family? As in Patricia's family?" Barbara nodded. "Her daughter-in-law's baby shower. How convenient," I muttered. "Well, they'll need to find another venue." As Barbara turned to leave, I called after her. "One more thing, I'll be attending the next board meeting. Make sure everyone knows." She nodded stiffly before hurrying back to her car. That evening, I spent time researching event space rentals in the area and creating a simple business plan. If I could rent the pavilion out 12 times a year at $1,500 per event, that would generate $18,000 annually, not a fortune, but a nice supplemental income for something that had literally been built on my property without my consent. I created a basic website, Thomas Point Pavilion, Charleston's newest intimate event space. I uploaded photos of the structure, listed its features, and set up a booking inquiry form. Within an hour of the site going live, I received my first inquiry, a couple looking for a space for their anniversary party next month. The next morning, I was drinking coffee on my back porch when I heard cars pulling up out front. Checking my security camera feed on my phone, I saw several vehicles unloading decorations, food, and gifts. The baby shower was proceeding as planned, despite my conversation with Barbara. I sighed and walked around to the front yard. There was Patricia, directing people as they set up tables under the pavilion. When she saw me, her smile hardened. "Good morning, Logan. Beautiful day for a celebration, isn't it?" "It would be, except you're trespassing on my property," I replied calmly. Patricia laughed as though I'd told a mildly amusing joke. "Don't be difficult. Barbara told me about your concerns. We can discuss property lines at the next board meeting, but my daughter-in-law's shower has been planned for months." "I'm not discussing property lines, Patricia. I'm telling you that you built this pavilion illegally on my land, forged my signature to do it, and now you're trespassing. Everyone needs to leave immediately." A young, pregnant woman approached, looking concerned. "Mom, is everything okay?" Patricia patted her arm. "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Mr. Thomas is just confused about some HOA matters. Go back to greeting your guests." I pulled out my phone. "I'm calling the police to report trespassing unless everyone leaves in the next 5 minutes. Patricia's fake smile disappeared. "You wouldn't dare ruin a baby shower. You ruined it when you decided to hold it on stolen property," I replied, beginning to dial. "Fine," Patricia snapped, grabbing my wrist to stop me from calling. "We'll relocate." "Happy now." "Ecstatic," I replied dryly. "And don't touch me again." For the next 20 minutes, I watched as frustrated guests packed up food, gifts, and decorations. The pregnant daughter-in-law was in tears, while Patricia shot daggers at me with her eyes. I felt a twinge of guilt about the innocent partygoers, but reminded myself that this situation was entirely of Patricia's making. Once everyone had left, I installed private property and no trespassing signs around the pavilion. I also added 2 more security cameras specifically covering the structure. If the HOA tried anything else, I'd have it documented. 3 days later, I received a certified letter from the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association demanding that I cease and desist from claiming ownership of community property and interfering with scheduled community events. The letter was signed by Patricia Miller as HOA president and included a crude property map that conveniently showed the pavilion sitting on common area land rather than my property. I forwarded the letter to Olivia, who responded with a single text. "They're digging themselves deeper. Don't respond yet." The following evening, my doorbell rang. When I opened it, I found an older gentleman in a golf shirt and khakis standing on my porch, looking uncomfortable. "Mr. Thomas?" I'm George Reynolds, treasurer of the Oak Ridge HOA board. I was wondering if we could talk privately about the Pavilion situation. I studied him for a moment, then stepped aside to let him in. Come in, but I'm recording this conversation for my records. George nodded, following me to the living room. That's probably wise given the circumstances. Once we were seated, George got straight to the point. I've been on the board for 8 years, and I've never seen anything like this. After speaking with Barbara and reviewing our documentation, I have serious concerns about how this project was approved and executed. I appreciate your honesty, I said. What exactly did Patricia tell the board? George sighed. She presented what appeared to be signed approval forms from you, along with permit applications that she claimed had been approved by the county. She said you had verbally agreed to allow the HOA to build on that corner of your property because it was underutilized and would enhance community values. And no one verified this with me directly. I asked that very question. Patricia said you were unreachable at sea but had signed everything before leaving. In retrospect, we should have been more diligent. Yes, you should have, I agreed. So what are you proposing now? George cleared his throat. Officially, I'm not here. This isn't a board-sanctioned visit. But unofficially, I think you have every right to be upset, and the HOA's position is legally indefensible. So you're breaking ranks. Let's just say I'm not interested in being personally liable for fraud. Patricia has scheduled an emergency board meeting for tomorrow evening to discuss legal action against a homeowner attempting to appropriate community property. I'm giving you a heads up because I think her approach is going to make this situation worse for everyone. I appreciate that, George. I'll be at that meeting with my attorney, George nodded. I thought you might. One more thing, how much did this pavilion cost to build? According to Barbara, about $42,000. George's eyebrows shot up. The board only approved $28,000. I'll need to look into where the additional funds came from. After George left, I called Olivia to update her on the emergency board meeting. She agreed to accompany me and suggested we bring copies of all my documentation to distribute to each board member. We'll give them one opportunity to acknowledge their mistake and negotiate a reasonable solution, she said. After that, we'll file suit against the HOA and Patricia personally. What kind of reasonable solution are you thinking? I asked. They publicly admit wrongdoing, compensate you for the use of your land, and either pay to have the pavilion removed or formally transfer ownership to you with a proper bill of sale. And if they refuse, then we pursue damages for trespassing, fraud, and whatever else we can reasonably claim. Given the evidence of forged signatures, Patricia could potentially face criminal charges as well. The emergency board meeting was held in the community clubhouse the next evening. When Olivia and I walked in, the room fell silent. About 20 homeowners were present, along with the 7-member HOA board seated at a table at the front. Patricia sat in the center, a stack of folders in front of her and a determined expression on her face. "Mr. Thomas," she said coolly, "this is a closed board meeting. You can address the board during the homeowner forum at our regular meeting next week." Olivia stepped forward. "I'm Olivia Wellington, Mr. Thomas's attorney. Since this emergency meeting specifically concerns my client and his property, we have every right to be present." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "This is about HOA property, not Mr. Thomas's." "That's precisely what we're here to disprove," Olivia replied, setting her briefcase on the table and pulling out folders for each board member. These packets contain Mr. Thomas's property deed, survey maps from when he purchased the home, county records confirming property lines, and security camera footage showing unauthorized construction on his property. as well as what appears to be forgery of his signature on documents. The board members looked at each other uneasily as Olivia distributed the folders. Patricia's face flushed red. "This is ridiculous. The HOA has proper easements for community enhancements." Olivia pointed to a specific page in the folders. "Please turn to Exhibit C, which clearly shows there are no easements on that portion of Mr. Thomas's property. The only easement is a standard utility easement along the back property line, nowhere near where the pavilion was constructed." George Reynolds flipped through the documents, then looked up gravely. "These property records appear to be in order, Patricia. The pavilion does seem to be entirely on Mr. Thomas's land." Patricia slammed her hand on the table. "That's impossible. I reviewed the plat maps myself. Did you?" Olivia asked. "Because the county records office has no record of anyone requesting those maps in the past year. However, they do have record of building permits being applied for with what appears to be a forged signature." The room erupted in murmurs. One of the board members, an elderly woman named Dorothy, spoke up. "Are you suggesting that our HOA president committed forgery?" "I'm not suggesting anything," Olivia replied. "The evidence speaks for itself. I direct you to Exhibit F, which shows security camera footage of Miss Miller on Mr. Thomas's property with documents bearing what appears to be his signature, dated 2 months after he left for sea." All eyes turned to Patricia, who was now visibly flustered. Those documents were signed before he left. I was just reviewing them on site." "Then why does the date on the documents clearly show March 15th, when Mr. Thomas left in January?" Olivia asked. "And why does the signature not match his known signature, samples of which are provided in Exhibit G?" Patricia stood up abruptly. "This is absurd." "The board approved this project unanimously, based on fraudulent information you provided," George said quietly. "If what Mr. Thomas and his attorney are showing us is accurate, you misled the entire board." The meeting devolved into chaos, with homeowners shouting questions and board members arguing amongst themselves. Finally, Barbara Johnson called for order. "Let's approach this rationally," she said, adjusting her glasses. "Mr. Thomas, what exactly are you seeking here?" Olivia looked to me, and I nodded for her to continue. "Mr. Thomas has 3 requests," Olivia stated clearly. "First, immediate acknowledgement that the pavilion was built on his private property without permission. Second, compensation for trespass in the amount of $5,000. And third, either removal of the structure at the HOA's expense or formal transfer of ownership to Mr. Thomas with a bill of sale for $1, acknowledging the HOA has no further claim to the structure or the land it sits on." Patricia scoffed. "Absolutely not. We spent over $40,000 on that pavilion." "On my client's land without his permission," Olivia countered. "Under South Carolina law, any permanent structure built on private property without permission becomes the property of the landowner. My client is being generous by offering options rather than simply asserting his ownership outright." George turned to the other board members. "I move that we go into executive session to discuss this matter privately." Dorothy seconded the motion, and the board voted unanimously to clear the room. Olivia and I waited outside with the other homeowners, many of whom approached me with questions. "Did Patricia really forge your signature?" asked a man who introduced himself as Marcus. "The evidence suggests so," I replied carefully. "And the pavilion is definitely on your property?" asked another neighbor, Rachel. "According to my deed and survey maps, yes." A third neighbor, Bill, shook his head in disgust. "Patricia's been overreaching for years. Last summer she tried to fine me for having my garbage cans visible from the street on collection day. After about 45 minutes, the homeowners were invited back into the meeting room. The board members looked grim, and Patricia was noticeably absent. George Reynolds, now apparently acting as the board spokesperson, addressed the room. After reviewing the evidence provided by Mr. Thomas and consulting our bylaws, the board has made the following decisions. First, we acknowledge that the pavilion was indeed constructed on Mr. Thomas's private property without proper authorization. Second, we agree to compensate Mr. Thomas in the amount of $5,000 for trespass. And third, we will execute a bill of sale transferring ownership of the pavilion to Mr. Thomas for the nominal sum of $1. There were murmurs throughout the room, but mostly of relief rather than protest. "Where's Patricia?" someone called out. George sighed. "Miss Miller has resigned from her position as board president, effective immediately. The board will appoint an interim president until our regular elections in October." "What about the money?" asked a homeowner near the back. "If we approved $28,000 for the pavilion, but it cost $42,000, where did the extra money come from?" George exchanged glances with Barbara. "We're conducting a full audit of our finances. Initial findings suggest some irregularities that will require further investigation. We will keep the community informed as we learn more." After the meeting, Olivia and I spoke briefly with George and Barbara to arrange for the paperwork to be drawn up. As we walked back to my house, Olivia looked pleased. "That went better than expected," she said. "I thought they'd put up more of a fight." "I think once they realized the legal trouble they could face personally, they made the rational decision," I replied. "Plus, Patricia's apparent embezzlement probably made them eager to distance themselves from her decisions." "So what's next for Thomas Point Pavilion?" Olivia asked with a smile. "I've already had 3 booking inquiries," I said. "If all goes well, I'll recoup that $5,000 compensation in a few months and start turning a profit." The following week, I signed the paperwork officially taking ownership of the pavilion. The HOA also delivered a check for $5,000 as agreed. George informed me that Patricia was under investigation for embezzlement, having apparently diverted HOA funds for personal use over the past 2 years. The extra money spent on the pavilion was just one example of her financial mismanagement. I wasted no time getting my event rental business up and running. I added more string lights, purchased tables and chairs, and installed a better sound system. I hired a local college student to help with setup and cleanup for events, and partnered with a few local caterers who offered package deals for anyone renting my space. My first official booking was for a retirement party in late July. The guests raved about the beautiful setting, and I received 2 more booking inquiries from people who attended. By September, I was fully booked through the end of the year, with 12 events the maximum allowed by the HOA bylaws. In October, George Reynolds was elected as the new HOA president, running on a platform of transparency and accountability. One of his first actions was to commission a forensic audit of the HOA's finances, which eventually revealed that Patricia had embezzled nearly $60,000 over 3 years. Criminal charges were filed, and Patricia and her family quietly moved out of the neighborhood before the case went to court. 6 months after the confrontation at the board meeting, I was hosting a small corporate retreat at the pavilion when a process server arrived at my door with legal papers. Patricia was suing me for unjust enrichment, claiming that I had unfairly profited from the HOA's investment in the pavilion. I immediately called Olivia, who reviewed the lawsuit and laughed out loud. "This is the most frivolous suit I've seen in years," she said. "She's admitting to building on your property without permission, then claiming you owe her for it. I'll file a motion to dismiss and ask for attorney's fees." 3 weeks later, we appeared before a judge who took less than 20 minutes to dismiss Patricia's suit with prejudice and order her to pay my attorney's fees. The judge was particularly unimpressed by her attempt to claim rights to something she had illegally built on private property, while facing criminal charges for embezzlement. As the 1-year anniversary of my return home approached, Thomas Point Pavilion had become one of the most sought-after small event venues in the Charleston area. I had raised my prices to $2,000 per event and still maintained a waiting list. The business was on track to generate $24,000 in annual revenue for only 12 days of actual use, a remarkable return on an investment I never made. The HOA, under George's leadership, had become more respectful of homeowners' rights and more transparent in its operations. The audit had led to better financial controls, and the new board was focused on maintaining the community rather than expanding its power. One sunny Saturday in May, as I was setting up for a wedding reception, Barbara Johnson stopped by. "It looks beautiful," she said, admiring the flower arrangements and white paper lanterns. "You've really made something special here." "Thank you," I replied, surprising myself with how genuinely I meant it. "The board wanted you to know that we've revised our bylaws regarding property improvements and homeowner notifications," Barbara said. "We now require written consent directly from homeowners, verified through multiple channels, before approving any projects that might affect private property." "That's good to hear." Barbara hesitated, then added, "We've also increased the number of allowed commercial events for exterior structures from 12 to 24 per year. It'll be announced at next month's meeting, but I thought you'd want to know in advance." I looked at her in surprise. "That's unexpectedly generous," she shrugged. "The board felt it was the right thing to do, especially considering how this all started. Your business brings positive attention to the neighborhood, and several homeowners have mentioned that their home values have increased partly due to your venue." After Barbara left, I walked around the pavilion, taking in all the improvements I'd made over the past year. What had begun as an infuriating trespass had transformed into a profitable business, and, ironically, improved my standing in the community. People who had previously only known me as that guy who's always away at sea now saw me as a local business owner and active community member. The ability to host 24 events per year would potentially double my income from the pavilion. At current rates, that could mean up to $48,000 annually, more than enough to cover my mortgage and property taxes, essentially allowing me to live for free when I wasn't at sea. As I hung the last of the paper lanterns, I couldn't help but smile at the irony. Patricia had intended the pavilion to be her crowning achievement as HOA president, a visible symbol of her power and influence in the community. Instead, it had led to her downfall and my unexpected success. That evening, as the bride and groom shared their first dance under the pavilion lights, with Charleston's sunset painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks behind them, I raised my glass in a silent toast. "Here's to Patricia Miller," I thought, with more than a little schadenfreude, and her unintentional contribution to my financial independence. The following Monday, I received a letter from the county prosecutor handling Patricia's embezzlement case. They were offering her a plea deal that would include restitution to the HOA, 2 years of probation, and 200 hours of community service. They wanted to know if I had any objection to the terms, given my involvement in uncovering her misconduct. I thought about it overnight, then called the prosecutor's office the next morning. "I have no objection to the plea deal," I told them, but I would like to suggest that her community service include financial literacy education for homeowners about their rights and responsibilities when dealing with HOAs. The prosecutor laughed. Poetic justice. I'll see what I can do. 2 months later, I spotted Patricia at the county library, leading a workshop titled Understanding HOA Governance, Rights, Responsibilities, and Red Flags. She looked older and more subdued than when I'd last seen her, the arrogance gone from her bearing. When our eyes met briefly across the room, she quickly looked away, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. I didn't stay for the workshop. Whatever redemption Patricia might find through her community service wasn't my concern. I had a pavilion to prepare for an engagement party that weekend. As I walked home, I reflected on how differently things might have turned out if Patricia had simply approached me honestly before I left for sea. I probably would have considered allowing the HOA to build a community pavilion on my underutilized land, perhaps with a formal easement and clear usage guidelines. Instead, her deception and entitlement had cost her everything while unexpectedly enriching me. Thomas Point Pavilion continued to thrive over the next few years. I expanded my offerings to include basic decoration packages and partnered with more local vendors to provide comprehensive event services. With the increased event allowance, I was able to host 2 events per month, carefully scheduled around my time at sea. The additional income allowed me to be more selective about my maritime contracts, taking only the most interesting or lucrative assignments and enjoying longer periods at home. I became more involved in community activities, not through the HOA, but through local charitable organizations that sometimes used my pavilion for fundraising events at reduced rates. 5 years after the pavilion incident, Oak Ridge Estates had transformed into a model community with an HOA that served its members rather than ruling them. George Reynolds had completed 2 terms as president before stepping down, leaving behind a legacy of transparent governance and respectful enforcement of reasonable rules. As for me, what began as an infuriating discovery upon returning home had evolved into an unexpected second career and a valuable lesson. Sometimes your enemy's worst mistakes can become your greatest opportunities, especially when they build them on your land.